Hi, everyone, and welcome back to SIG. I am Stephanie McGarry, and I'm the Chief Engagement Officer here at SIG, and I am excited to have you back. Today's session will be the key to smart digitization, and I'm thrilled to introduce two dear friends to SIG, both Michael Van Kolen and Alpar Camber. Michael is the Chief Procurement Officer with Coupa, and he's a seasoned executive with a comprehensive track record of driving value through business transformation at global companies. Throughout his career, Michael has been forward-thinking and innovative with progressive roles in procurement and finance for companies going through fast growth. For these companies, he has orchestrated multiple procurement transformations, implemented procurement best practices, and digitized the procurement process, driving significant stakeholder value. He is the Chief Procurement Officer at Coupa Software, the global leader in cloud-based business spend management, and he is responsible for driving best-in-class procurement practices across the company to support business development and be a source for peers looking to digitally transform their procurement. He's especially passionate about driving value, organizational transformation, sustainability, and diversity and inclusion. So welcome, Michael. And also we have Alpar Camber, who is the Executive Vice President and Head of Procurement Services for WNS Denali. Alpar is the head of procurement services for WNS, and he was the founder and CEO of Denali Sourcing Services, now a part of WNS. It was a next generation procurement services provider that enabled procurement organizations to influence more spend and execute more effectively and efficiently. Prior to Denali, Alpar developed his cross-industry expertise in procurement value chain while in management positions at Ariba Free Markets, Diamond Technology Partners, and E&Y. He holds his MBA degree from Tupper Business School at Carnegie Mellon. So with that, guys, I'm so excited to introduce you both. And folks, this is supposed to be a very interactive session. So please enter your questions at the bottom at your Q&A area, and we will make sure to address each of those at the end of the session. So with that, welcome, guys, and let's take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining us from. Today, I'd like to welcome you to a very important topic, is smart digitization. I'm here with Michael from Coupa, and together we're going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the market and some of the learnings that we've observed, and hopefully walk away with some key takeaways that you can apply when you go back to work in your digitization journeys. First, I'd like to turn over to Michael to introduce his company.
Yeah, thank you, Alpar, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Van Kolen. I work for Coupa. I am the Chief Procurement Officer. Just real quick on Coupa. Coupa is a comprehensive business spend management platform. We've been doing this for a very long period of time. We bring together a platform that's based off of best practices around the procure-to-pay core functionality, and around our core functionality around business spend management. We have quite a few applications that allow us to just make better and smarter decisions around our business spend management. We have over 1,000 customers, well over 1,000. We manage around about $1.6 trillion worth of spend, and we do this in over 100 countries. Our platform is highly collaborative, with a lot of community intelligence as well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm Alpar Camber. I am the CEO of Denali, a WNS company. We're, in essence, the procurement services business of WNS, which is a global business process management company. Within my business unit, we have about 3,500 global team members, procurement practitioners who are helping our clients to support their procurement functions every day. We offer end-to-end procurement services, manage about 85 billion of spend globally across 350 categories, and we're located in 53 global locations. And in our journey to help our clients, we've also introduced a Procurement Academy, and that we co-create capabilities for our clients. And also very relevant to today's conversation is digital innovation. We take pride in making investments in solutions that bring digital enablers to how to make procurement work better. Now, I'd like to, if we go to the next slide, introduce you, to the procurement ecosystem. So this is a concept that we've introduced late last year, and really, in my role in the company, is really to talk to clients, talk to procurement practitioners and industry leaders, and understand, how to elevate the role of procurement in a sustainable way. And what we've observed procurement organizations do historically is really to focus on bits and pieces of procurement. I've seen companies to look at, hey, we need to improve and simplify our processes. We don't have policies, so let's write up a policy and introduce that to our organization. We need the best of breed platform to bring and implement in organizations to make procurement work. Or we need to build relationships with our stakeholders. So all these, actions are good in an effort to improve procurement. But what we've seen is more at work is if you think about the ecosystem as a whole, and all these different bits and pieces are really the elements of and the players in the ecosystem that function and interrelated and interconnected with each other, right? So, you may think the outcome or the desired outcome that you may be seeking is savings. And we spend quite a bit of time on this illustration. And actually, we've written an article in Harvard Business Review on this, so you can download that in the conference app, or you can go to hbr.com and look for it there. Which, the outcome of procurement, you may realize, okay, it's savings, as illustrated in RAIN, but to get that RAIN, we need clouds. And to get clouds, we need the entire ecosystem really to work in tandem, your stakeholders is illustrated as Sun, et cetera. So, the whole idea is everything is interrelated, and we'll have more examples to talk to you about that. And recently, if you go to the next slide, we've conducted a benchmarking study in an hope to identify some key characteristics of high-performing procurement functions. We've talked to and asked about 300 organizations. In partnership with SIP's organization, we did this study together. And our findings are quite interesting. So I'd like to share a little bit of this and also wanted to get your input on this, Michael. So one of the findings of high-performing procurement organizations is that 60% of them have a clearly documented 3 to 5 year vision for their procurement organization. And so that highlights the importance of planning and vision and long-term vision before you do anything. What do you have to say, Michael, about that based on your past experience and current experience as a CPO?
Yeah, no, I think one, it's a pretty high percentage. I'm glad to see that at least companies are realizing that procurement has a role to play. If I go back into my career, I've had the pleasure of leading procurement transformation a couple times, both at VF Corp and at Lululemon. And at those points, there was no procurement, or the way the procurement was done was not in the best of strategic way. So it was heavily focused, to your point earlier, around driving savings and not so much about creating value. So one, I'm excited to see that 60% of the companies now have a clearly documented vision. I think where the challenge still lies is where procurement continues to be perceived as more of a, I'm going to call it like a tactical operational purchasing function, versus somebody who really is going to dig deeper into the spend and making sure that the suppliers we have really align with the strategic vision of the company. And I think that's still where we have opportunity from a procurement perspective to continue to drive that agenda forward. But at least I'm excited to see that 60% have a vision. I think a couple of years ago that was certainly not the case.
Fantastic. Another finding that we've done is the 63% of these high performers are fully integrated with the business objectives, in their strategic planning. So what that means is they don't really develop objectives and plans in a vacuum on their own, but they're actually going out and integrating with the lines of business, understand their overall business objectives and tying their work to them. What has your experience been in terms of getting alignment with your stakeholders?
Yeah, and this is, different audiences within your organization will require a different approach, right? I always say, I think one of the key traits of a high-performing procurement organization is having the ability to resonate with different leaders in an organization. I'm not surprised about the metric, right? I mean, if you're fully integrated and you truly understand what the strategic objectives are of your organization, that's the time where, from a procurement as a practitioner, where you can really drive full value and you can be fully immersed in finding the right suppliers with the right specifications and the right SLAs or lead times or innovation even to really help achieve business objectives. And I would even argue that we can help accelerate achieving those strategic objectives. So not surprised with the metric, and this is absolutely where procurement has a role to play, and especially in today's market.
Yeah, absolutely. And these objectives are really can vary, right? So we have clients, we have a social media client that we're working with, and for them, it's really about speed. It's speed of, building data centers, it's speed on making sure the certainty of those data centers that are built with the right quality and the right accuracy. Whereas, we have another client who's in the retail business, and for them it's really about supply chain risk and cost, right? And so depending on your industry, depending on the times, obviously in recession times as we're living through today, and the uncertainty that creates the need to drive more cost savings, obviously, but we still need to understand, what is it that the underlying business objective, and how can we translate what we do in procurement to support that. And these are the times that procurement gets the most attention and called out the most. So I think this becomes a very important point in high performing procurement organizations. The next finding was, 78%, a significant percentage of the high-performing companies is really separating, segmenting tactical work from strategic work. And this is an important one. And this is one that we've also been spending a lot of time on working with our clients to implement an operating model that deals with the different natures of work, right? So there is obviously strategic work, which is category management, strategic planning, and stakeholder alignment. There's tactical work, which is running RFPs, putting contracts in place, and there's also transactional work, which is putting POs in place and paying suppliers and onboarding suppliers. So, and high performing companies really have segmented and created an operating model that deals with these different types of work with different types of roles or pools of resources. Do you have any experience to talk to that?
Yeah, no, I think, one, I couldn't agree more. I think separating tactical, operational from strategic sounds very easy. It's not always easy to execute, right? But I couldn't agree more. Like I'm a big fan of what I call an activity-based model within procurement. So if you look at all the different tools and elements of the procurement process, they are very similar across industries. So they go from sourcing to contracting, and then from the downstream procure to pay process, and trying to separate those different elements of the process and really getting focused on driving real competitive strategic sourcing, having real category management, managing your contracts and your spending all the way to your downstream, more tactical operational. It's absolutely critical. The value that you create upstream, you want to make sure you capture downstream, if you will. So the upstream from the sourcing and the contracting, and then of course making sure that we capture all the savings downstream. So it's not like one is more important than the other per se, but separating those out, one is going to drive better outcomes, but it also requires a slightly different skill set. So like running a competitive process is a very different skill set than doing vendor management or deep analytics. And so separating those out into slightly different functions will ultimately drive way more value. So I'm excited to see that that this one is on here, and it's absolutely critical to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on. It's about the skill set as well as the nature of the work, because I've seen a lot of complaints from the companies that we started to work with, is that because all this work is lumped into the same pool of people, even if they have the skill set to be strategic, they cannot get to it because there's always a tactical need that needs to be responded to, and that overrides firefighting and being more reactive to the business. And once you get caught in that cycle, then it's very difficult to break away and find the quality time and focus that you need to drive some strategic initiatives. So I think it's a very important finding. The next one is obviously, we've talked about the ecosystem, and the most important element, a key element and a player in that ecosystem is people. Even though the topic today is digitization and automation, how we do that in a smart way, ultimately, people are kind of the backbone of what makes this function work. And so 75% of high performing organizations make this a priority, and they invest in people, deliberately. They have programs to do that. And that's also one of the reasons why we've introduced, our academy, to bring those strategic skill set and to help prepare the organization as some of the tasks and functions get automated, get digitized, and it makes room for newer skill sets to arise, to be more analytical, to be more relationship oriented, to go understand the lines of business. So the skill sets gap is narrowing, but it needs focus and an intentional investment in people.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, it is still about people, right? I think the journey that procurement is going to be on is that EQ is becoming more and more important. Having the ability to put together, a supplier ecosystem with an internal stakeholder, and really understanding where the strategic objectives are of your internal stakeholder, and almost like becoming a matchmaker to some degree. That requires a high EQ, right? Having the ability to really understand what you're trying to achieve, and that does require people, and it requires top talent, and it requires a really clear messaging to that top talent of why they need to pick procurement in the first place, and why procurement is so exciting, and why I love procurement, and why I've been doing procurement for a long period of time. And But people is a key priority. It'll always be a key priority. Driving innovation, stakeholder relationships, vendor relationships. I mean, they're paramount. So
you're right on, right? I think if we just keep talking about spend and savings, we do a disjustice to procurement, right? So I think when I think about procurement, the mandate is really to manage all of the company's external resources, right? For a given company, you certainly have your internal resources, your employees that are doing work for the company, for the shareholders, but there's an equal amount of external resources that the company is tapping into, and in order to help company achieve its objectives. And the fact that if we left procurement's mandate just to look at a small piece of the money that company spends on these external resources, it just does a very disservice. And we need to think broader about that ecosystem, and think about how do we better integrate and co-create value with these external suppliers, external resources that is at our disposal, right? So I think definitely, and there's no other way to do that without the right talent, without the EQ and business acumen.
Totally. The
next one is really around digitization. So we've also asked them, what is their priority when it comes to digitization? 83% of the CPOs said that they prioritize digitization above anything. right? And but when we look at those 83% of CPOs, only about 30%, 28% have seen great adoption. About 30% is still in progress. They're trying to figure out the value, but this is an important one that we found out is a bit surprising to me, but I think is also important for this topic. Is 43% of companies that prioritize digitization are not seeing the value. So really, I want to talk about next in terms of why is that, and why are they not seeing the value, and what can they do to either accelerate or uncover the value that digitization can bring to their organization.
Yeah, no, it's if you look at this slide and you really kind of let this kind of seep in for a little bit, then you're like, wow, that's actually not awesome. But when you look at this, I think the key to, it's the key to any project. It doesn't matter if it's digitization or anything else. It's change management. You're gonna have to make sure that you understand what your current processes, and I've done this several times. So current processes are, and how they will look like in a digitized environment. And it might require you to change your business processes. And if you do not realize, if you think that just digitizing is going to take all your problems away, that's the recipe for disaster. So the change management is the key. I am part of the 83%. I also believe I'm part of the 28% on the slide. So, but it's the change management, and it's making sure that whatever solution you pick, whether it's Coupa or whatever you pick, is that you involve the business. Ultimately, it's about user adoption. If you do not get the adoption, if you do not have a comprehensive, usable, very user-centric platform that is easy to maneuver and almost makes it as easy to use as like Amazon, then you're not going to get the adoption. And if you don't get the adoption, from a procurement perspective, I don't get the analytics, I don't get the community, I don't get all the benefits that digitization will bring to the table. And then your business case falls apart. And then very quickly you're not seeing the value. So to me, those are some of the key traits, and we can talk about this topic for a very long time, but some of the key traits of things that you really need to focus on as you get onto this journey.
Absolutely, and I think we will talk about more about what makes or breaks digital adoption and really to get the benefits and the value from the initiative. Before we get into that, I think the next slide I wanted to just focus on one thing, and I'm actually want to ask you a question, but let me introduce this concept to you. So what we've seen historically, and I studied procurement, or I've studied management science back in college, and one of the books and the concepts I fell in love with was the book by Elia Goldratt. The book's name is The Goal, and it really introduces this idea of theory of constraints and thinking about anything that you're working on as a system, and identifying, once you know what the constraints are, once you know what to change, and what you need to change it to, and then how do you create, a sustainable operating model that will enable that change. You really start to maximize the value that you can get out of it. So if you think about procurement as a system, this goes back to my original discussion around the ecosystem, that everything is connected. So in here, you have a project pipeline. These are, your business stakeholders and, your category managers identifying list of projects. Then that turns into sourcing projects, that turns into contracts that you manage, and then turns into savings and eventually EBITDA for improved EBITDA for the company. So when you look at this picture, I'm going to ask you, which is also written here, where is the bottleneck in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the bottleneck very quickly gets to C, right? To contracting, and how do you ensure that once you have that contract in place, that you actually utilize the contract, that you have contract compliance, that you get the preferred pricing, and that you get the preferred terms, and that you leverage the spend to pre-approved and pre-selected suppliers to begin with. I think the other thing that where there's bottleneck is in A, right? It's your work intake, as we call it, or how do I help prioritize, right? How do I, all stakeholders, in a perfect world where procurement has that seat at the table, will come to you and say, hey, I have all these priorities, I got all these projects, but I'm going to have to help prioritize that, right? I'm going to have to make sure that we put our time and attention into those areas that we drive value, that we can drive a meaningful, impactful value. So yeah, that would be my initial reaction to this.
Yeah, and you're right on, right? So exactly, you're generating a lot of contracts, but they're not resulting in savings. You still have a lot more room to go and generate more savings. So is the compliance. So when you put this in the context of today's discussion, if I'm the CPO and I'm automatically jumping in my digitization effort, right? And if, one of the things that I want to focus on in this digitization effort is compliance. And it's to making sure that all these great contracts that my organization is negotiating and putting in place are actually get utilized, right? And so, and digitization, a platform, is a very viable solution to making sure that compliance is enabled throughout the organization, right? Whereas, if my bottleneck was in sourcing, then I would want to focus on how do I accelerate my sourcing efforts, right? Some of it could be done with digitization, but some of it could be done by, again, going back to segregation of duties and putting the right level of skill set or the right amount of people who can churn through the sourcing project. If my pipeline is humongous and I can only manage so much of sourcing projects, maybe I need a bigger team who can turn through those sourcing projects, right? So I think the concept here is, I don't know what the bottleneck, those of you listening to us for your organizations, but you can easily draw this down and kind of start asking the right questions to find out what are the, what is the key bottleneck that you want to influence and change. And that, that might be compliance today. It may be, sourcing tomorrow, or it may be, your stakeholder engagement and pipeline creation, that you don't have enough projects in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So let's talk, more about, I think you and Hope have done a study on this in terms of, digitization and some of your findings. You want to share some of those?
Yeah, totally. So what we're looking at here is, this is a benchmark that we've done across our ecosystem. And these are some of the metrics that top performers, right? Top performers are achieving. So 98% of pre-approved spend. What that really does, what this really does, is it makes your procurement process very, very proactive, right? It allows you to influence spend before the spend occurs. So 98% pre-approved spend, 92% electronic PO processing. So if you think about it in a traditional environment where you get paper in, it goes to accounts payable, you get the invoice, now you need to route that invoice for approval. In a digitized environment, it becomes touchless, right? You'll be able to flip your purchase order into an invoice. That invoice electronically goes to the supplier, and the supplier will flip that back into an invoice. And so that's the digitization part. From an efficiency standpoint, 90%. These again are top performers. 90% will have first time match rate. It makes sense, right? It's a purchase order that gets flipped into an invoice. So 90%. I mean, again, try to put that into your current organization and try to figure out what your percentages are, and you can identify the gap, and it's going to help you understand where you can drive value. From a compliance standpoint, 81% on contract spend. Again, put yourselves into your current organization where you work and see how much spend you currently have on the contract. I think a key metric for any procurement professional always is, how much spend do we have, and how much spend do I have on the management, and how much spend do I have on the contract? I mean, those are key KPIs. If I talk to any practitioner out there, those are some of the things that we talk about. How much spend do you have? How much percentage of that spend do you have on the contract? I think the key takeaway for all of this is how do you make your buying process more proactive? How do you get ahead of the spend? I always say, receiving an invoice is awesome, but it already happened, right? And you can react to that and say, we should have not done that, or we should have bought from somebody else. But making that process more proactive. And so I always encourage people that are listening to this webinar, but just in general as well, is look at your process holistically. Don't just fall into the trap of AP automation or analytics, or I need a contract lifecycle management process, or I need a sourcing platform. No, look at your entire ecosystem. Don't parse it out into 6 different platforms. Don't look just at your ERP and the capabilities that it brings. Look at your digitization as an ecosystem, and then decide what you really need, and then go ahead and get that. That's ultimately going to drive more value, and you can achieve some of these pretty high metrics.
Yeah, and this is the why, right? This is why, and the outcome, why you're doing this digitization effort. And if we talk about the previous, constraint analogy, we thought there was a compliance issue, and that was a constraint, and you can solve that by driving compliance through digitization and getting it up to 81% plus, right? So I think you're right on as to first understand, where the bottleneck says, and then apply digitization so that you can achieve these results to debottleneck those areas.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, this is just at very high level. Okay, well, what are the benefits? This is another way of looking at the why. We just looked at some metrics and some benchmarks and some best-in-class companies out there. But what are the benefits? I think if you look in, and especially in today's market, but even before the COVID crisis, resilient companies are the ones that have digitized their business spend management process. And what it gives them, it gives them some of these key traits, right? You gain visibility and have the ability to control your spending, not just from I'm going to turn spend off. No, it's about where do I spend? Who are my suppliers? What does my ecosystem look like? How can I reduce my administrative complexity? I just tried to articulate where, purchase order to invoice flipping can happen in the cloud, in a digitized environment. Just a reduction, not having to deal with the paperwork, having to run paperwork through the building. Just again, put it into your own organizations and try to really understand what benefits that drives for you in terms of efficiency in your workforce, and what you can do with those resources if they no longer are occupied in shoveling paper around. Managing your cash flow. Some of the things that we're seeing in our ecosystem with our community is having the ability to accelerate payments with your suppliers in today's market. Writing virtual checks, making virtual payments, utilizing digitized ways of that will allow you to maximize your cash flow, not just for your own company, but also for your supplier community, because you're going to need those suppliers coming out of this situation here with this pandemic. Risk and risk mitigation. I'd say if you are still thinking about potentially elevating the role of procurement in your organization, you're behind what best-in-class companies are doing. This is our time. We've written a few things as a company. Our chief executive officer has talked about it as well. This is our time to lead. This is our time from a practitioner standpoint to take the reins of your company and manage risk and mitigate it. And the last thing I'll say about digitization is just think about the ecosystem that we've built. I mean, we did describe the $1.7 trillion worth of spend, but having the ability to tap into that from a practitioner standpoint. What does competitive look like? What do my peers do? What do my competitors do? Of course, it's anonymized, but I still have the ability to see, what best in class looks like, and raising the bar on that front is going to unlock a massive amount of opportunity. So those are some of the key things. I don't know, Alpar, with your perspective. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think, to summarize, right, procurement is always, I've been to a lot of conferences and talked to a lot of, companies and audience. I think the topic has always been, how do we get more attention, right? How do we be, be on the table so, we can influence spend or we can influence decision. Well, now is the time, right? We got the attention. So now the question is, what are we going to do about it? And if you go back to the discussion we've had earlier around the ecosystem, right? And, digitization really about data and information, right? What are we digitizing? Well, we're digitizing information and data. And all these different players in the ecosystem, your stakeholders, your suppliers, your category managers, they all need to be interconnected, and information needs to flow among all of them in a seamless, in a concerted way. If that information is not flowing without a friction, then they're not acting in concert in order to work together to maximize the value that can get created. So it's really, when I look at digitization, is really the linchpin of making the things ecosystem work. And in harmony, right? And is really connecting all these players in the ecosystem so that they are aware of each other, and you can take actions and decisions in an intelligent way and in a faster way.
Totally. I mean, just to tap into that, I mean, you just said something, this is our time. Yeah. I just want to, it's almost like a call to action, right? I mean, this is our time. To get from the basement to the boardroom, right? And to your point, always saying like, I don't get that seat at the table. I've been saying for years, nobody's going to give you the seat, man. You got to grab it. It's yours. It was always ours. It was always ours to begin with. And it's really a call to action for us. And the digitization of your procurement process is just going to enable you to accelerate it, to capitalize on the opportunities that are actually in the market today. Yes, this pandemic will end, and we will have to get through this. And you're going to have to show a certain amount of resiliency. You're going to have to show a certain amount of agility, but you're also going to have to have a certain amount of guts and to seep through it. And if you do, then I believe that companies will come out of this better than they went in.
Absolutely. This is a time of investment as well, and making our organization stronger and ready for the future. And a great way to do that is, look at the ecosystem as a whole and plan what needs to change, take that action, and digitize what you can, so that you are more responsive and you are more informed, you are more predictive, right, in the future.
Yep.
Great. So let's summarize it. So what are some of the lessons learned, right, from your experience and our studies and what we're seeing in the market? So I'll start with a few of them, and I'll let you go through a few of yours as well. So one of the key things, and you mentioned this as well, is change management. Obviously, platforms and procurement doesn't run itself, right? You need people, and we need everybody to work in tandem to adapt to a new way of doing things, whether that's a new piece of technology or a new process or a new policy. I've seen companies fail, that 40% of CPOs who've taken action on digital efforts but not seen the benefits of it, is they underestimate the change management effort. So if you think, you're going to put one project manager or change agent to drive this change, put two of them. If you're going to take 1 month to plan that change management, double it, take 2 months to do that. If you're going to send out 2 emails about communicating that change, send 4 emails, right? So it's really doubling your efforts, because you can never do enough in this change management. There's not such thing as you overdone change management. So, one key takeaway is really to overdo it and to double your efforts. The second is planning before you act. I think it goes back to some of the things we've touched together on this, is know what to change first. Don't change everything at the same time. Understand where you can drive the biggest impact and the value. If your bottleneck is compliance, act on that first. If your bottleneck is project pipeline, implement an intake form and, a stakeholder management tool and digitize that. So plan your journey before you act. And then the third one is around, forget that tools are the answers to all your problems. Digitization is the answer to all your problems. You need to think about tools and digitization as an enabler. It's the key enabler that, fast tracks everything that you do and can solve some of the problems. But if only if we think about them as enablers. And without the right process, without the right change management, without the right outcome in mind, tools fail, digitization fails. So just know the role that digitization plays in this whole transformation that you're driving.
Yeah, no, I think they're really good points. I just want to touch on the management, the change management effort. I would say you'll only get one time to make a first impression, right? And so, as you implement this thing, you're gonna have to make sure that you really, really understand how this is going to change people's lives, right? The way they show up at work, So the change management, to your point, I would even say if you think about one, I'd say to get three. That's really, to me, has truly been the secret to success, if you will. Make videos, do webinar, like make it really, really accessible. What I would say as a maybe a slight counter is also make sure that it's very user centric. Make sure that you select something that is carried by the business, that doesn't just work for IT because it's easy to integrate, and doesn't just work for finance because I get great reporting and great accrual reporting or analytics, or has great sourcing capabilities. No, you want to make sure that middle section, that beating heart of your digitized process, the procure to pay, if you will, that really, really resonates, because that's where the actual spending happens. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick. The other things that are important is, you want to make sure that it's a scalable solution, right? That you don't get yourself bogged down into something that works in one part and it doesn't work in another part of your business. So really make sure that it's a scalable initiative. And then you want to make sure that you whatever resources you uncover, that you reinvest them into strategic initiatives. The more value you can create out of the digitization of your procurement and your business spend management process, the more, it's almost like the gift that keeps on giving, is how I like to refer to that. And the last thing that I'll say is, for it to be prescriptive, you want to make sure that you leverage the intelligence, and by leveraging the intelligence that you gather, you're going to be able to be way more prescriptive in your spending, in the problems you're trying to solve, in the potential risks that you're trying to mitigate, into the compliance challenges that you may try to solve for. But the data, it's at the end of the day, it's all about capturing the data, managing the data, and then maximizing the value that data is going to give to your organization. So those are some of the things, in addition to the ones that you referred to, Alpar, that are really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're all linked, right? So plan before you act. If you don't plan, again, today you may be solving a compliance problem, but in the future you're going to want to address next is, how you gain visibility into your spend, or how you connect with your stakeholders. If you don't have that plan and you don't pick a scalable solution that can not only help you today, but also help you in the future, it's really going to be important, that you do that, because ultimately this is a journey. It's not a one-time that you're addressing something today. I think it goes well with your being prescriptive to the problems that you're solving, and really understanding what to change. So, I think your observations are spot on. Well, good. I think, that was, what really we wanted to share with you today in terms of our findings in this whole digital transformation journey, and being smart about it, and, looking at some of the things that are non-digital that will drive your digital agenda, and also, what we learned from some of the studies that we've done. I think with the remainder time, we want to open up for questions. Both Michael and I are available to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, guys. That was fantastic. Perfect. There you both are. We had a number of questions come in the last 45 minutes or so. So let me just start from the top. Michael, this one is for you. You talked about how now is our time as procurement leaders, and making your own seat at the table. I loved that. You said you got to take it. What are some steps you took to move from the basement of the boardroom, as you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thank you for asking. We talk a lot about resiliency, and how resilient companies will get through this pandemic and look better at the other end. And as I keep talking about, like, getting from the basement to the boardroom, I think a few things are really important. I think the first thing that's really important is that you have a clearly defined role for procurement. Are you clear in describing what you're here and uniquely qualified to deliver? It's around spend management, spend visibility. And so having a really clear perspective on what your elevator pitch is almost. I think that's one way to get from the basement to the boardroom. I'd like to refer to myself as an investor almost. I'm investing the company's money, and I am able to drive a better outcome, a better ROI than without procurement, right? That's my elevator pitch. So having a really clear message around that, having a clear RACI, what am I responsible for as procurement? What do I drive? But equally important, what does the business drive and what's their role? I am not here to do their job. I'm here to elevate, I'm here to accelerate strategy, but I'm not here to do the job of my stakeholders. So having clear swim lanes is why I refer to that. And the last thing I'll say, and we touched on it as well, is just separating your operational work from your strategic spend management work. Having really clear defined roles around that, to me, has really elevated the role of procurement from what you refer to as basement to boardroom.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Great advice. Alpar, did you want to add anything? I have another question for Michael, but you feel free to add if you would like.
No, I think that's well said. I think definitely, this is the time, as I said, that we have the attention as procurement, and we need to take advantage of that, right? And we need to show what we can deliver, and that's often, one of the key findings of high-performing, procurement organization is to align with the business. What does the business want? It could be cost, it could be risk management, it could be access to new sources of supply, it could be speed, it could be innovation. So understand that, and let's not follow our own agenda, but follow the agenda of what does the business want.
Right. Okay, thank you. Michael, another one for you. This is a good one. My digital initiative just got deprioritized in light of my company's situation. We no longer have the budget. What can we do to make sure we're not falling behind even more as we wait for budgets to come back and priorities to shift?
Yeah, great question. What I always encourage procurement professionals to do to start off with is, do you know your checkbook? Run a spend cube. You can download your AP subledger transactions and start applying some kind of taxonomy that either works for you, but really just download your AP. You can do that today. You can walk away from this webinar, download your AP, and then start classifying your suppliers, either GL accounts, cost centers, and then apply the 80-20 rule, right? Typically 80% of your spend is with 20% of your suppliers. And then you're gonna have to dig deeper. You're gonna have to figure out, what am I buying? Why am I buying? What's my lead time? What does my demand look like? Can I manage demand? Are we buying 12 months in advance? And what's the cost of capital and all of that stuff? Just really do a little bit of, what your homework is. And then start thinking about what's happening in the market today. Look at oil price, right? Oil price, I mean, at some point, I think the traders were giving you money and the oil, right? And so understanding, like, what does that mean? What material am I buying that is driven by oil? And am I having a real collaborative conversation with my supplier and say, look, your cost is coming down, what's in it for me? So really look at that. Leveraging your spend, you can do that. You don't need a digitized platform to leverage your spend. Am I buying similar things from 4 different suppliers? Well, at VF Corp, we had 7 different suppliers for shopping bags. Consolidate that to 1. Sounds pretty basic, but lots of opportunity there. Those are some of the things that I would say you can do even without a digitized platform. Having digitized your procurement process, obviously you'll have that at your fingertips.
Yeah, let me also add on to it or address it from a different perspective. So certainly, investing in a tool comes with budget, right? So there's, money involved in investment, but there's a lot to do to get ready for that tool. As I said, and we've summarized, the tool or a digital platform doesn't solve your problems, right? It's an enabler. So look at your processes and simplify them, right? Start doing that so that when you have the budget to implement a platform, your processes are ready. Start developing content, right? The tool itself is not going to give you the content. What is your category plan? Who are your suppliers? And what do you want to put on a catalog? Or there's a lot you can do to get your content ready. And you can start getting your data and understanding, to Michael's point, and start cleaning up your sources of data and where that's coming from, and identify some of the problems, so that again, when the time comes, you are ready to implement a platform in a much faster and more sustainable way.
Good additions there. Thank you, Alpar. We have a question, how do you define high performers? So you both can go to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address it from the survey context. I think that's coming from, we've asked, we were trying to identify the high performers and what are some of the commonalities. So to define that, it goes back to three measures, right? Reach, effectiveness, and efficiency. So when we say reach, it's really around, procurement organizations' ability to influence the spend and the decisions. So what percent of the spend and supplier contracts do you have under contract or under influence? So you can call it spend under management. You can call it, supplier decisions being influenced in a given day. So having a, 80% plus is in the high performing range. Mm-hmm. And as well as that reach is defined as your net promoter score. So if you ask your stakeholders, would they recommend you to another stakeholder, right? So your net promoter score is also important. So that's from a reach perspective. From an effectiveness perspective is really the value part. How effective are you once you have access to those spend, supplier decisions? What are you doing? So obviously savings is one simple one that you can drive, but that's not the only one. High performing procurement organization, achieve the business outcome. So whether that's managing risk or driving innovation or speed to market, all these are metrics that you will define and your ability to influence that. So that's the effectiveness part. And then the third part is efficiency, your cost and speed of running procurement. It's the cycle time of POs and the cost per PO, cost per contract, cost per sourcing project. So there's a lot of metrics that go into that. But, efficiency is another metric that you would look at. So those are the three things that defines a high performing organization.
Yeah, one great metrics there. I'm a finance guy at heart, so metrics are always important to me. If you kind of tap into that just a little bit further, a world-class procurement organization, is able to drive an ROI of 10x up, right? So that's another way to look at it. It's like, what's the total investment that a company makes into the procurement organization? Running a 10x plus ROI is world-class. That could also be top line growth, right? It's not just about cost takeout. Cost takeout at some point you'll be, and having a competitive cost base, at some point you'll achieve that. But innovation and top line is something that I would say is value that procurement can deliver. In terms of investment, I roughly use a 0.8% of the total spend, and Alpar, welcome your perspective real quick if you have it. 0.8% of the spend is roughly the investment that needs to be made in procurement in order for you to drive those savings, right? So that's another metric that I use. Then other things that Alpar was touching on is like things like risk, mitigation of risk, reputational risk, environmental risk, sustainability. Those are all sorts of other metrics that I'd like to apply.
Right. Good question, or good answers, guys. Thank you. This is such valuable. And we have about 6 minutes, but I want to let it go a little longer so we can try to get through all of these questions because they're very good questions. So Alpar, this one's directed to you. Your research said 60% of companies have a 3 to 5 year vision. In times right now, that long of a plan is likely not possible as we adjust our business models and priorities. How do you think we can create a more short-term vision and plan right now? Very good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think, we stop planning for the long term because I think, yes, there is some uncertainty in the near future, but we know what we need to do for the long term in terms of making our supply chains more agile, getting more visibility and be faster in acting and responding to the changing needs of the business. But having said that, there is a more immediate mandate that we need to comply with, and that's different for each company depending on your industry, right? For most, it could be obviously being leaner, right? Looking at where you can save some cost and preserve some capital and cash, so that you can you are stronger and you survive through this uncertainty, the downturn, right? So from that perspective, one of the campaigns that we're launching and we're talking to companies about is accelerating savings and cost reduction. And there's ways to do that. We've been in this market around 10 years ago. 10 to 12, the 2008, 2009 recession. And that is coming up with, everything is off the table, turn every stone you can look at and to drive accelerate your savings that will return cash and, savings in the near term. It would also mean start looking for new sources of supply. As you've seen risks in other regions, being dependent on a single region for your critical supplies, is not the right way to do, obviously. So you need to start creating redundancy and identifying alternative sources of supply so you can de-risk your supply chain.
Sure.
So the answer to that is certainly, is not different than listening to the business, listening to your executives and understanding what is the mandate depending on your industry, and coming out with what does that mean, translating that to procurement and driving that agility with your team to address that, right? But having said that, I wouldn't take off your long-term planning off the table. It still needs to be done, needs to be in concert with what you're doing with your overall business plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The next question, well, Michael, did you want to add anything, or I'll go?
Next question, let's get questions.
Okay, great. This one's to you, Michael. You talked about being agile and flexible. What are a few of the ways that you practice being agile as a CPO, and how can you get started with an agile approach to procurement?
Yeah, so agility might mean different things to different people. So to me, it means quick, but also be mindful. I think, Alper, you just kind of hit the nail on the head there. What you need great relations. You need great relations with your internal stakeholder, but also equally important with your supplier community, right? And understanding what matters to both of them, not just internal, because we have the tendency to do that often, but also look at your suppliers. What matters to a supplier? Is it cash flow? Is it lead time? Is it service level? Is it contract? Is it whatever might be relevant, right? And seeing how can I be the matchmaker, if you will, between the supplier and my internal stakeholder. How can it's not the win-win thing. It's more, how do I drive the most amount of value out of that relationship? And if you can do that very quickly, and you can do that mindfully, and if you can do that in a very using a strategic lens and stop making it transactional, to me, that is agility at its finest.
I agree. Alpar, you talked about business constraints and how to find them. Is there a common constant that you see over and over as an outsider, yet many people fail to see because they are just so close to the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some, it's a good question. There's definitely some common constraints that we see in procurement in general, right? I mean, to name a few, data, right? If it's taking you enormous amount of time to figure out where your spend is and who you're spending it with, and what your requirements are, obviously you can start with data. Resources are always a bottleneck. You can ask the question, what if I have access to another 10 people? What can I do with them? Could they accelerate savings, and is there an ROI in that? So that could be another bottleneck. The complexity of your processes, and the fact that it's taking you months to get a contract done, tells me that you have what if you could do that contract in a few weeks? Then you can start realizing the savings months earlier. That would mean generating cash and savings months earlier, right? So there's a significant ROI in what we do. So how do you find them? You ask questions and you say, what if I did this? What if I shortened the amount of time it took for contracts to be done? Or what if I doubled my capacity to run sourcing projects? Or what if I invested in a tool that would give me real-time visibility to my spending so I can make some predictive decisions? So I think you ask these what if questions and trying to find the answer, and then that will tell you where the constraint is.
Right. Okay, thanks, guys. So we have 3 more questions, and we are out of time, so we'll answer these quickly. Alpar, this is always a favorite one. Digital myth to bust procurement, what would it be?
Ooh, digital myth to bust. That's a tough one. I think, I'd go back to, the tools are only an enabler. Don't overestimate them. And I would continue to focus on, the content and the process and the change management piece ultimately, is what's going to get you through and create value. Absolutely, tools are required, but I wouldn't put all my eggs in my strategy or around a tool.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and this one, you mentioned that the same people do tactical and strategic work, and digitizing can remove the tactical work for those resources, allowing more focus on strategic skill sets. In a scenario where there is a tactical team that could be, quote, replaced by digitizing, how do you mitigate those concerns and navigate the people aspect?
Yeah, and it's another great question. I'll answer it, and I want your opinion, Michael, too, on that. I think there's strategic work, tactical work, transactional work. So let's not confuse tactical and transactional. To me, again, running, a sourcing project or, negotiating and putting a contract in place can be considered tactical. There's a strategy you're following, the strategy is defined, but then you're putting it to execution. And then the transactional piece is, placing orders, paying suppliers, which that's the biggest opportunity to automate is in the transactional side. Ideally, I don't want anybody to spend time on transactional work, right? So that should be automated as much, unless there's some troubleshooting, et cetera, we can do to monitor it. But ultimately, that's the most amount of automation and digitization that will happen. The tactical work can be accelerated, can be streamlined by using digital platforms and digital tools, right? So I don't think the goal there is to replace people with technology. The thing is to make people more productive by giving them tools and platforms, right? So, and what do you do with the people that you automate on the transactional side? Well, ultimately, you give them tactical work or more project-based work so that can be more value added to the organization.
Couldn't agree more.
Anything to add?
No, I mean, ultimately, it's also what you can add to the mix is retention and job satisfaction, right? I mean, you can even go deeper there and that'd be a whole different conversation, but getting people away from operational work that adds zero value to the business and allowing them to do stuff that is more, even if it's tactical, but it's more considered more strategic and you really drive value. I mean, it's gonna just unlock a completely new skill set. And I think from a retention and satisfaction standpoint, I think that's what people want. It's more fun.
I agree. They want to grow. They want to, they're all passionate about what they're doing and they just want to be better. Let's end on that. That is a perfect way to end. It's a good feeling throughout. So guys, this was incredible. Thank you so much. I always love talking to both of you. So thank you very, very much. Folks, this will be on demand in 24 hours. So you can listen to it again. If you have additional questions for Alpar and Michael, you can reach out to them directly through the platform or reach out to us at SIG and we'll make sure to connect you guys. So both of you, thank you so very, very much. We truly appreciate your time today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.
Michael, bye.